Greetings and thank you for tuning in to Just Teach Ministries. My name is Tamika, and today we have an exciting lesson coming from the book of Daniel. We'll be going over chapter 1, verse 8 through 21, and the title of our discussion is Faithfulness Under Pressure. Now, faithfulness is often romanticized in Christian conversation, but rarely understood in reality. We admire faith when it produces miracles, delivers from lions' dens, or quenches fiery furnaces. But scripture consistently teaches that extraordinary faith is forged through ordinary daily obedience under pressure. Now, long before Daniel interpreted dreams, surveyed political schemes, or witnessed the rise and fall of empires, he actually faced a far more subtle challenge: whether he would quietly compromise when no one from Jerusalem was watching. Now, this is something that we all may experience, but Daniel 1, it actually does not open with visions or prophecies. It actually opens up with captivity, loss, and displacement. And Daniel and his friends are teenagers at the time of this event in history. They're uprooted from their homeland, stripped of national identity, and they're immersed in a culture that is not like their own. It's a pagan educational environment, and the pressure to conform in Babylonian life reaches a boiling point. Now, yet in this environment, Daniel demonstrates what faithfulness is not. Is that it's not situational, it's intentional. So Daniel's story teaches us that faithfulness under pressure is not loud rebellion, but quiet resolve. It is not defiance for defiance's sake, but conviction rooted in trust in God's sovereignty. This lesson invites us to examine our own faithfulness. And how do we live when obedience is inconvenient, costly, or misunderstood? Now, we can remain holy without becoming hostile, can we? Can we serve faithfully in systems that do not honor God? Well, Daniel answers these questions not just with theory, but with a life well lived. As we make our way into the lesson, into the background and context, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and click the all notifications bell. That way, you will be notified when we upload weekly lessons. Now, we want to also invite you to visit us at justteachministries.com, where we have many Bible study resources. Now, on the store tab, you'll find lesson notes for all of the various passages we've studied on this platform. These notes are the exact notes that we use for every presentation. And there is a link provided, a direct link in the description of the video to the lesson. And there's also lesson notes, and there's a link in the top of the comments section as well. Now, they are available for a small donation. You can also scan this barcode, this QR code here in the corner, or this corner. And again, the notes are just a small donation. And we just want to thank each and every one of you who have supported our channel, who have been purchasing the notes and tuning in each week for every lesson. We do appreciate all of your time and your support. Now, we're going to again get started and dig into this lesson. And I want to go over So let's get into the thick of the lesson. Now we're going to be discussing our key verse at the moment, and that's going to be Daniel 1 and 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Now, we do have 3 points in this week's lesson, and that is purpose over pressure, we have faith over fear, and testimony after test. Now, as we go throughout each section, we're going to analyze the choice that Daniel and his friends faced and that choice's outcome. Aspire to have faith like Daniel when confronted with contradictory directives from authorities, and identify similar situations that call for us to exercise our faith. Now, as we're going through each section of the lesson, I want you to ask yourself, have you ever been tempted to compromise your standards of your faith to be accepted by others? Now, just to give you some background, the book of Daniel does open up during one of the darkest seasons in Israel's history, and that is the Babylonian exile. Now, Judah's captivity did not occur in a single moment, but it unfolded in 3 distinct waves, each marking deeper devastation and loss. So, the 3 waves of exile first start with the first deportation, and that's around 605 BC. And this is the time where Daniel's being exiled. Nebuchadnezzar invaded Jerusalem and carried away a select young men from the royal noble families. So this included Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And that's in Daniel 1, verse 1 through 2. Now, these young youths were chosen for their intelligence, their physical appearance, and leadership potential. We see that in verse 4. So he's pretty much picking the best of the best. And at this time, sacred vessels from the temple were taken to Babylon and placed in pagan temples. We see that in 2 Chronicles 36 and 7. Now, this symbolizes the humiliation of Judah's worship because they're mixing holy items with pagan items. Now, there's the second wave, which is the second deportation, which included Ezekiel's exile. Now, thousands more were taken, including King Jehoiachin, craftsmen, warriors, and priests. We see that in 2 Kings 24, 13 through 14. And Ezekiel began his prophetic ministry among the captives by the river of Shabar. We discussed this in last week's lesson. That's in Ezekiel 1, 1 through 2. And then you have the third wave, which happened around 586 BC. So the first wave, that took place around 605 BC, the second wave around 597 BC, and then there's the third wave in 586 BC, which is the final destruction. So Jerusalem is destroyed in the final destruction. The temples burned and the walls are broken down, and we see that in 2 Chronicles 36 verse 18 through 19, as well as 2 Kings 25 verses 9 through 10. Now Judah ceased to exist as a sovereign nation at this point. And Babylon did not merely conquer military, it sought to reprogram identity. Selected Jewish youths were educated in Chaldean language, literature, science, and worldview. They even changed their names. So they were all given new names to replace the Hebrew names that, for instance, Daniel, which means God is my judge in Hebrew, became Belteshazzar. And Bel, protect the king. That's what Bel means. Now, the goal was assimilation. So Daniel's righteousness stands in stark contrast to Babylon's moral decay. Ezekiel later names Daniel alongside Noah and Job as exemplars of righteousness in Ezekiel 14, 13 through 14. Jesus himself also affirmed Daniel as a prophet in Matthew 24 and 15. Now, the power of Daniel's testimony lies not only in accuracy, but in consistent faithfulness under pressure. Daniel 1 8 through 14 says, Daniel purposed in his heart. So this brings us to our first point. Excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me get back in here. So we're going to be covering verses 8 through 14 in our first point. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed you meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which ye are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat the portion of the king's meat. And as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So he consented to them in this matter and proved them 10 days. So we see here that the king is not only controlling what they learn, he's changed their names, and now he's trying to force them to eat like they eat, or he's telling them what to eat at this point. So verse 8 marks a turning point. But Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. The Hebrew language is precise and powerful because the word purposed in Hebrew is to set firmly, to determine beforehand. Now, heart in Hebrew is the mind, will, and inner self, and the word defile in Hebrew is to pollute or desecrate. So Daniel decided before temptation arrived. This is a crucial principle of spiritual maturity. Convictions must precede circumstances. So, as Charles Spurgeon would say, he said, he who does not resolve to resist sin beforehand will yield to it when it comes. So the king's food it wasn't sinful in appearance. It was luxurious and nourishing. Yet it likely violated God's laws in 3 ways. 1, it was prepared by Gentiles and ceremonially unclean. So they may have been using they actually probably more than likely was using this meat in pagan sacrifices. So this included meats forbidden under Mosaic law as well, and possibly again offered to pagan gods. And we see this in Exodus 34 and 15. Now, Daniel's restraint was not legalistic, but covenantal. And Titus 2:11 through 12 reminds us that grace teaches us to deny ungodliness, not to accommodate it. So Daniel did not protest loudly or rebel aggressively. He actually simply requested permission, which in Hebrew is to abstain. Now, his submission reflects Proverbs 19 and 2 and Romans 10 and 3, which is zeal without knowledge leads to sin. Now, Daniel's capacity or his captivity did not excuse compromise. Obedience is not suspended by difficult circumstances. As a matter of fact, as that saying goes, diamonds are best produced under pressure. You don't get diamonds without pressure. So faithfulness is not about control, but trust. Now, this brings us to our second point. testimony after test. And at the end of 10 days, their countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. And Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. My bad, you guys. That was our second point. Faith over fear. I'm getting ahead of myself. My apologies. So, again, our second point, we see here that not only were they proven in their faithfulness, but God granted Daniel favor. And that word favor is in compassion in the eyes of the eunuch. So, or in the eyes of Aspenaz. So, scripture consistently affirms that God governs human relationships when his people walk uprightly. Proverbs 3:3-4 says, "Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck, write them upon the table of thine heart, so shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man." So Aspenaz feared the king, and his concern was practical, not malicious. And Daniel's obedience placed others at risk, but faithfulness often does. So Daniel proposed a 10-day fast. He humbled himself respectfully and measurably, and he asked for pulse. Now, that word pulse in Hebrew is just simply vegetables, and it's clearly permitted by law. So sometimes holiness requires going beyond minimal compliance. Paul captures this principle in 1 Corinthians 10:23 when he says, "All things are lawful, but not all things edify." So Daniel did not demand exemption, he invited evaluation. True faith is not threatened by testing. As a matter of fact, faith is pretty much strengthened and grows under pressure. Now, at the end of 10 days, they appeared healthier, stronger, and better nourished by their diet compared to the diet of the other men or young men who were eating the king's meat. So, godliness influenced policy, obedience had a ripple effect. Now, Daniel 17-21 is what is going to be covered in our third point that I skipped to testimony after test. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now, at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. The king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, stood they before the king, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. So we see here that God's favor was with them in their faithfulness, because not only did their appearance seem much better than those who ate the king's meat, the king also found them to be even more intelligent than those he sought for knowledge and information. So God rewarded their obedience with intellectual excellence. That word knowledge in Hebrew is midah, understanding. And Learning in Hebrew is written scholarship, as well as wisdom in Hebrew is discernment. So Daniel actually received unique spiritual gifts of understanding, which is discernment, visions and dreams. And also, this affirms James 1 and 5. God gives wisdom generously to those who ask. Now, Nebuchadnezzar personally examined the use for himself. So he saw for a fact that these young men did not eat the items that he requested for them to eat, but their diet alone, they still appeared to be more fit than all those around them. Now, keep in mind, they also changed the names of Daniel's friends as well, and they are better known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego with their new names. So after Nebuchadnezzar personally examines the use, Daniel and his friends, they stood before him. And that term in Hebrew means officially service or official service before a king. So faithfulness positioned them for influence. They found favor in the sight of the king, and they were found 10 times better than those around them. And a Hebrew idiom signifying overwhelming superiority. So God's wisdom outshined Babylon's occult practices. We see that in Deuteronomy 18:10 through 12. So Daniel remained faithful through Babylonian and Persian reigns, serving under up until King Cyrus's reign. And the king, God named by prophecy. And we see that in Isaiah 44:28, as well as Ezra 1 and 2. As John Calvin wrote, God does not abandon those who honor him, though he may try them severely. So that is the end of our lesson. And just to sum things up, what we can do with what we learned today is that Daniel 1 teaches us that faithfulness is not forced in crisis, but it's revealed there. It's when we're at our worst that our faith is tested the most. And how we handle that pressure determines how we grow in our faith. Daniel did not become faithful when the lions roared. He actually was faithful when the food was served. Faithfulness under pressure begins with inward resolve. It expresses itself with humility and wisdom, and trusts God with outcomes. Leaves a testimony as well that outlives the trial. In a culture that pressures believers to compromise quietly, Daniel reminds us that holiness is possible without hostility and obedience is powerful without aggression. Now, we may, like Daniel, purpose in our hearts long before pressure comes along to honor God. So we need to have our minds made up and our hearts made up that no matter what we go through, we will remain faithful to God. And may our faithfulness today prepare us for greater responsibility tomorrow. For those who honor me, I will honor. 1 Samuel 2 and 30. So that's it. That's the lesson. That is what I have for today. I hope that you've learned something new. I hope that you've enjoyed the lesson. And most importantly, I hope that you'll come back and join us for next week's lesson. Until we meet again, God bless.